Greetings and welcome to another Educator Innovator Hangout on Air. It's Thursday, October 23rd, 2014, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Creative Computing, Getting Started with Computational Literacy in the Classroom. I'm your host, or actually one of your hosts today, Brennan. I'm a faculty member here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm thrilled to be joined by three of my favorite people, and I thought we could actually just go around and have people introduce themselves. So we've got Christan, Ingrid, and Michelle. So why don't we kick it off with Christan?
Hi, I'm Christan Balch. I was a technology. Hi, I'm Christan. I was a technology innovation and master's student here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education last year, and I helped Karen and Michelle work on the curriculum guide this past summer. Michelle?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Chung. I work here at Harvard as a research project manager for the Scratch-Ed initiative that was started by Karen when she was a PhD student at the MIT Media Lab. And I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you about getting started with creative computing.
Hi, I'm Ingrid Gustafson. I'm an Instructional Technology Specialist for the Cambridge Public Schools grades 6 through 12, and I've been using Scratch since 2008, since the first Scratch conference.
So I thought I'd begin with two notes. One note, and you may have already started to detect this, unlike most Hangouts where people are geographically distributed, the four of us are all in the same room. So we're experimenting a bit with like push-to-talk technology, taking turns muting and unmuting. So if there's some we're anticipating some glitches, I think, with being heard and not heard. So bear with us as we work through that. But we love hanging out together, and it only made sense to hang out in the Hangout. So that's first note. The second note is, if you're watching this Hangout from the Educator Innovator blog page, we really encourage you to participate. Jump into the chat room to converse with others who are watching, and we'll be posting links there, and we really want this to be a discussion, a conversation. So as you go, we'll be looking for questions from you and really learning together. We really think of this as participatory as we can make this, given the format. So does that seem okay? Anything else from Christan, Michelle, Ingrid, any other notes? No, we're getting little head nods. Okay, so let me give you some context. So I'm going to ask Michelle to turn to, we've got a few visuals, and I just wanted to actually start out with a visual with our guiding questions. So we're trying to think about what we want to help you make sense of today. And so we're going to feel really good if we can help you establish some initial answers to the following questions. So what is creative computing? This is built into the title of the session. We're looking at creative computing in a particular context using the Scratch programming language. And so perhaps you don't know what Scratch is, and we'll help you do some of that. We wanted to really make this practical for you, so in the chat room, if you want to share your background and context, we can further customize the content based on your interests and needs. So like, how is Scratch being used? How might that relate to what you want to be doing? And then in the spirit of things being really useful and pragmatic, we wanted to give you concrete examples of how to get started with things. Okay? So those are our four goals, and I think we'll feel pretty good if we can get through at least initial pieces of that in the next 55 minutes. Okay? So if there are no objections from my teammates, shall we dive into the first question? Okay, so what is creative computing? So the impetus for this phrase for us is acknowledging the omnipresence of technology in the world. And so computers are everywhere, the language of computers, computer code is everywhere. And so how do we think about interacting with technologies beyond just consumption? How do we enable everyone to be a producer, designer, maker, creator with computation and code in ways that is empowering for individuals, that has people writing and making? And so this summer, Elise from National Writing Project was a speaker at the biennial Scratch Conference, and it really resonated with me and with all of the participants at the Scratch Conference that there's a very shared sensibility on writing with the NWP community, and the Scratch community. And thinking about writing isn't just about writing text, it's about writing in all sorts of different mediums. And so that's really the spirit for us. Creative as in creating, as in writing, and experimenting and producing and iterating. There's just so many shared sensibilities. So that's really the heart of it for us. Like, how do we think about engaging in these creative, liberatory, empowering practices? Those are lofty goals, I know. And so we wanted, like, how do we start with those lofty goals and make them like practical and bring them into the classroom or whatever environment you're in, because we see these practices fitting in all sorts of ways. So that's a little context about what Scratch is, what creative computing is. Why don't we move to what Scratch is? So if we look at the next visual, if you haven't seen Scratch before, this is the Scratch environment. So you build your own interactive media. This might be stories, games, animations, interactive art, by snapping blocks together and programming your own media. So we see a cat on the screen. You can make the cat do things by snapping blocks of instructions together, just as you might snap together blocks of things like Lego in the physical world. So on the next slide, this is sort of a zoomed-in view of what Scratch looks like in action. This is kind of the whole thing with Scratch. You know, you bring in your own sounds, your own images, and then you make that come to life. You make it interactive by snapping blocks. You just and repeat and debug and all those good things. So Scratch is not only this authoring environment, but there's an online community where millions of people have shared hundreds of thousands of creations. And we wanted to give you just a smattering of what might be possible. So this is like a 3x3 of screenshots from different Scratch projects. So you can see we've got an interactive keyboard in the top left corner. In the bottom left, we've got an air traffic control simulation. Right above that, that's an interactive haiku. Someone's implemented solitaire in the middle. You know, like, there's so many different things you can do. And sort of your imagination is your only limit. I wanted to actually sort of tag in Ingrid for a moment, she's done a lot of work with kids. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you've been thinking about Scratch and the range of creative possibility that you've been working with.
Sure. So currently I'm at grade 6, work with mostly grades 6 through 12, but before I was focused on the older kids, I did a lot of work with the younger kids as well. So at this point I've used Scratch grades 6 through 12 basically. And we've done a lot of different things with it. I've done an art focus with Scratch where the kids focused on learning how to draw and then bringing those animations to life. I've done digital storytelling and movie trailers with Scratch where students were making their stories come to life and picking out different characters and deciding what actions they were going to take, adding in narration with either their voice or other people's voices. I had a student then who also created all the soundtracks for all of those movie trailers. So a lot of different possibilities for Scratch. I've also done a lot with math and science, which Scratch just lends itself to so nicely, with making simulations or stop motion animations and different types of games related to those subjects. So like Karen was saying, a lot of different possibilities for what you can do with Scratch, and it's exciting to use in the classroom.
And so we'll talk about this throughout the session, but that's just sort of a brief glimpse into what classroom practice might look like. So I mentioned you have all of these projects, and so on the next slide, we'll switch back to Michelle and the visual. There's this online community in addition to the authoring environment where kids are sharing their projects. And what I think is so powerful about the online community is that it's this very authentic audience where kids are sharing their work and they're able to make sense of it and get responses to their work from others. And I think that idea is so powerful. So this is sort of like the 10,000-foot view of what creative computing is, what Scratch is, a little taste of how Scratch is being used, but we'll continue that as a thread. But we're trying to get like a brief taste of everything in the first 10 minutes, and then we'll dive in deeper with all these things. The fourth question that we're talking about addressing is, how do I get started? So we wanted to do like a quick survey of resources. So if you have to jet off, at least you have these in your back pocket. So the first resource we wanted to let you know about is the ScratchEd online community. So that's scratched.gsc.harvard.edu. This was launched in 2009 There are more than 14,000 members in the Scratch Ed community now, having shared hundreds of stories, resources, thousands of questions and answers shared. So we've been really inspired by the sharing that takes place there. So if you don't know how to get started with Scratch, we recommend checking out Scratch Ed. Another resource, actually, this is hot off the presses in terms of the resources. This was just launched last Friday. A lot of people have been wondering, okay, how do I get started with Scratch? They're using Scratch. What does it mean to understand how computational fluency is being developed in young people, and how do we talk about it? How do we notice it? So we've just launched a site, Computational Thinking with Scratch. It has assessment tools that will help you document and engage in conversations with young learners about their learning and the artifacts that they're creating. So we're really excited about that. Another resource that we're really excited to share is the focus of this session. So this is what Christan, Michelle, Ingrid, and I have been working on. So it's the Creative Computing Curriculum Guide. This was launched in August of this year, and this is going to be the bulk of our session today. So if you are new to Scratch, getting started with the guide, we think is a useful tool. If you've already been working with Scratch, either a little or a lot, maybe there are fresh new ideas that might inspire you and help you get started. And so what we're going to do now is transition to Michelle and Christan, who will lead us through sort of a 10,000-foot view of the guide and a deep dive into some parts of it, just as like things to think with. Does that sound okay as a strategy? Are we ready? Okay, that's good, because that's the plan. Okay, so we'll turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Karen. So I'm not sure. I think you can see the screen. You won't be able to see me talking. I'll be blacked out. But maybe I can sort of share with Christan over here. So Christan and I will sort of lead you through just a short introduction to what the guide is. And as Karen mentioned, this is sort of going to be the bulk of our conversation here today, just for the next maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so. So talking about the guide, actually, giving a little history of the guide, there was a version that was actually introduced in 2011, and that was launched as an introduction to creative computing with Scratch. And so that was, after that was launched in 2011, it was actually downloaded over 100,000 times and translated into 9 different languages. And so based on sort of the success of that, after Scratch 2.0 was launched last year in May, we got some feedback from educators who had been using the guide. We got to talk to a lot of teachers who had been using Scratch for a long time. For example, Ingrid gave us some great feedback and worked with us on developing the new guide. And Christan and I and Karen worked on this over the last, I'd say, 9-10 months or so. On really revising it and coming up with a new version that would really introduce some of the new features of Scratch 2.0 and just be updated with some new activities and new lesson plans for teachers to get started. And so what the guide includes is actually 7 different units, and within each of the units are 6 different activities. So altogether there are 44 activities, and those include accompanying student handouts as well as teacher facilitator guides. So 40 handouts are included, as well as multiple links to different Scratch project examples, studios, and other resources that you can use to help your students get started. And so diving into what the guide actually looks like is that there are, let me see if I can, sorry, I'm controlling the slides and trying to facilitate at the same time. Okay, great. So there are 7 different units, and so diving into the very first unit, you'll notice that it's actually titled Unit 0, and you might be wondering to yourself, why is this called Unit 0 and not 1? The reason that we actually titled this unit Unit 0 is to really be explicit that this unit is all about just getting started, just preparing for getting ready to get started creating Scratch projects. So what you'll see in the activities in this unit are that they're all about just preparing, getting you ready. There's creating a Scratch account, getting started with a design journal, which is something that we encourage that students can keep track of over their trajectory of using Scratch. They get a very small taste of a small hands-on activity with Scratch, as well as exploring what a Scratch Studio is and what it's like to open a new project and add a project to a studio, and getting a little bit of feedback and looking into what it's like to get to talk to others about your ideas and some of the things that you're interested in creating with Scratch in what we call a critique group. And so that's Unit 0. It's very much just a very overarching way to get people to just sort of get started in some of the nitty-gritty of how to open up Scratch, how to create an account, and how to start a new project. Next, in Unit 1 is where we really dive into creating your very first project in Scratch. And so we call this unit Exploring. And sort of the large idea about this unit is that we really want to get students and teachers thinking about different ways to explore Scratch and to explore computational media in a productive and creative way. And so the activities in this unit are all about not just designing your first project, but experimentation and establishing a learning culture that's all about fearless exploration, because you really won't ever know everything about Scratch, even I've been using Scratch for over 5 years and I don't know everything. So we're really trying to establish a culture where people can feel that they don't have to be scared about trying out new things or exploring new ideas. So as for the activities specifically in Unit 1, what you'll see is that the way that we've organized the activities in the units 1 through 5, actually, is that we have 6 different activities, as you can see on the screen here. And in each of the units, the first activity that we offer is an off-screen activity. And this is this particular one, Programmed to Dance, was a really popular activity that we introduced in the very first guide in 2011. It was incredibly popular, so we remixed it and brought it back in this version of the guide. And what it does is it allows students to really explore first the concept of sequencing and what it means to specify a set of instructions. This off-screen activity is then followed by 3 capacity building activities. And those are activities where students are able to try out new blocks or experiment with new programming concepts or just try out a new feature on Scratch. And then that's followed by a debug it. And these are small challenges where there's a Scratch project that has something that's not quite going right. There's something that needs to be fixed in the project. And so in the debug it activity, students will receive a handout. There will be 5 links to Scratch projects that are somehow broken or need to be debugged. They'll go inside of each of those projects, look inside of them, and then be challenged to try to test out the different blocks and figure out what's going wrong and solve them. And so this was another activity that we remixed from the original guide. We had a smaller version of the activity that was offered originally, and then we received a lot of feedback from teachers that found that this was really helpful, not only as a way to have students try out different ideas, learn about testing and debugging, but also to really get used to this idea that not everything's going to work out the first time that you try it in Scratch. And so we've expanded this activity and included it in units 1 through 5 of the new curriculum guide. And then finally, each unit ends with a culminating project. And this is an open-ended, self-guided activity where we allow students to have a lot more open-ended time to explore a particular theme or concept, and then use some of the concepts and skills that they gained during the capacity building activities and the earlier activities in the unit towards developing a project of their own sort of choosing. So the theme of the first unit is about me. This is also another activity that we've remixed from the first version of the guide. And for this activity, students will be creating interactive collages about themselves. And so they can bring in different media, as Karen talked about with Scratch. They can bring in their own sounds, their own pictures, and use that media to create a collage that just tells others a little bit about themselves. So that gives you a little brief sort of smattering of the overall structure of some of the activities in Units 0 and 1. And now I'll pass it over to Christan, who's going to talk a little bit more about Units 2 through 4.
All right, so after the first unit of the About Me project, students are going to dive a little bit further into Scratch, into Units 2 through 4, which are organized around 3 different genres, which is animations, stories, and games. And then similar to what you saw in Unit 1, these activities were designed with the Choose Your Own... I am off mute. Oh. Technical difficulties over here. These activities were designed with the choose your own adventure approach in mind. So what this looks like is each of the units will have an off-screen activity that help their learners become more acquainted with the unit, which is then followed by 3 capacity building activities that can be used to supplement the culminating project for each unit. Each offer a debugging challenge. And finally, each include a culminating project that are focused around the theme of each unit. So what this looks like in Unit 2 is the creation of an animated music video. And this is really, it's done through the exploration of the arts. And students will have an opportunity to explore the computational thinking concepts of loops, events, and parallelism, as well as tinkering with new blocks like events, control, sound, and looks. In Unit 3, what this looks like is students will be working in collaborative groups to design a story. And through this, they're gaining a greater fluency with the computational concepts of events and parallelism, as well as the practices of experimenting, iterating, and testing and debugging. It's also an opportunity for them to gain an appreciation for the benefits of reusing and remixing while designing. And then in Unit 4, similar to what you saw in the previous curriculum guide, it's a games-themed unit. But in this guide, students have a choice of designing a particular game, which is either a maze game, a Pong, or a scrolling game, as they develop a skill set in common game mechanics. And through this, students will be introduced to computer concepts of conditionals, operators, and data, like variables and lists, as well as becoming more familiar with the computational practices of experimenting and iterating, testing and debugging, reusing and remixing, and abstracting and modularizing. So there's a lot going on in Unit 4, but it's really exciting. And moving on to Unit 5, Michelle's going to help walk us through this.
Okay, let me unmute myself first. There we go. All right, so moving on to Unit 5, this unit is actually pretty unique as in that it doesn't follow the exact same structure as Units 1 through 4. As you saw with the off-screen activity, the 3 capacity building activities, the debug it challenge, and then the open-ended self-directed project. And so in Unit 5, the reason why it's a little bit different is because after we released the first guide in 2011, we received actually a lot of feedback from teachers saying that there just wasn't enough time. Students would spend weeks on their About Me project or want to go back to a debugging challenge that they did and spend more time on that. And so based on that feedback, we designed this special Unit 5 Diving Deeper unit, particularly with that in mind, to allow students to have more time to work on projects, to dive deeper into new concepts, or to really just refresh or remix or refine ideas that had been previously talked about in other activities. And so what you'll see in this unit is that a lot of the activities are geared on having students sort of look back on previous work, reflect on some of the activities and ideas that they've previously explored, and then have opportunities to add on that with being able to have extra time to work on their projects or to explore new features in Scratch, like the camera feature, which is one of my personal favorite new features in Scratch 2.0, or cloning, or even thinking about hardware extensions. So the way that this unit is set up is that there's a first activity called Know, Want, Learn, and this activity is where students are invited to look back on their portfolio of projects and think about some of the things that they've already learned, and then consider what they might want to learn next, and then go on sort of a short research activity to do that. That's followed by an activity that we've titled Round 2, and as I mentioned before, this is clearly just meant to give students extra time. So they're just invited to go back to a previous project that they've already started and just have some open-ended time to continue working on it and create what we call a self-remix, or a remix of a project that they've already created. This is followed by an activity that is specifically designed around hardware and extensions, and in Scratch 2.0 this is a new exciting way that you can connect Scratch to different hardware kits for example, the Lego We Do or the Makey Makey or the Pico board. So if you're interested in having students explore physical computing, that might be a great activity to check out. There's also an activity that's particularly around the newest features in Scratch 2.0, as I mentioned before, like camera sensing, also cloning. These might be activities that some of the advanced Scratchers that you work with who might have some previous experience with Scratch might be interested in looking at. And then the unit ends with two new activities that we've introduced in this version of the guide called Activity Design and My Debug It. And these are for giving students a chance to design their own learning experience for others. So this might be something that you want to keep in mind, again, for students who might be a little bit more advanced than some of the other Scratchers in your class, that you might want to leverage as student mentors or student helpers for another class or for an after-school club that you're thinking of starting. And for these activities, students get to design their own activity or resource using Scratch that helps others get started learning about Scratch and creative computing, or they get to try their hand at creating their own buggy debug it challenge, which students love doing. So I really invite you to check out that activity. And so that's Unit 5. And now we'll move on to Unit 6, which is the final culminating unit of the guide.
So in this, unmute. In this final unit, students have an opportunity to build on their creative computing experiences that they've engaged in so far by engaging in an open-ended project of their choosing. But to help you and your students tackle this kind of open-ended design experience, we're inspired to frame this unit around a hackathon. With its ethos in embracing just-in-time learning, problem-solving, and its celebration of connected, collaborative learning environments, we thought this was a really great way to tie together the things that they've done so far, and it really captures the spirit of the curriculum guide as a whole with this choose-your-own-adventure theme in mind. So the way that this works is it's done through an iterative cycle of plan, make, share. So with the planning, it's what do you want to work on, like brainstorming ideas, preparing a plan of action. Making is where you're designing the activities. You're actually getting your hands on into the Scratch environment and building and tinkering with new ideas as well as old. And then sharing, you have an opportunity to share out with others, with your peers, with adults, teachers, whoever you want to kind of gather the feedback from. And this will help your learners in the next steps of their project creation. So like in the previous units, we have a series of activities that can help support this hackathon experience. In this one, there's 8 different activities that allow for opportunities to engage in planning, making, and sharing. So planning, an example of this would be project pitch, where students are coming together, brainstorming ideas, and pitching them out to one another to see what kind of project they want to work on. In the making, there's a design sprint. We have a couple of these in there where they're taking all the things that they've prepared up to that point and actually applying them in Scratch and working out with their groups what it is that they want to do. And then with sharing, there's things such as project feedback and then focus group where they're eliciting feedback from their peers and asking what's going on, what's working, what needs to be reworked, and really just gaining an understanding of how their project is going so far. And it's an iterative cycle, so it gives them an opportunity to do this over and over and over again. As you can see here, they plan, they make, they share, they plan, they make, they share, and so on and so forth. And so really this ends in a culminating project, or a culminating experience, which I'm really excited about, and it's a showcase. And it's an opportunity for all the students to show off what it is that they've done so far and show their friends, their peers, their teachers just how hard they've been working on these projects. It's a celebratory event, and I personally want to showcase my project. So. All right, and if you're looking for where you can download this guide, you can see here's the website. You can go on there. The guide itself is up, as well as student handout workbooks and editable versions if you want to go in and kind of choose your own adventure and tinker with the design of it yourself. So moving on to questions.
Yeah, questions and discussions. I think we're really excited so we've been participating in the back channel, which has been really fun, and we've been looking at a whole bunch of connections to Scratch. So there are people who participated in the creative computing online workshop that we hosted last year. So this was an online experience for teachers to get their hands dirty with Scratch, which has been a lot of fun. People have been talking about the Hour of Code event, so I think there are a ton of different directions we can go in. Then maybe we could start actually sort of bouncing it back to Ingrid to talk in a bit more depth about maybe some of the ways in which you've been supporting teachers. And I thought maybe we could start with worries and concerns. So I think in my work with teachers, I often hear like, oh, I couldn't do this because whatever, or I'd love to do this but. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience with supporting teachers, or even you, because I remember when you first got started with Scratch back in 2008. What do you think about when you think about getting started with Scratch, and what advice do you have for teachers who are just getting started, or maybe those who have been at it a while, and like points of new exploration and inspiration?
All right, so when I first got started with Scratch, I literally sat down at the Scratch conference and was trying to get this swimmer to get to this fish in the underwater scene, and it just was not happening, and I got really frustrated. And I remember getting up from the table and like taking a deep breath and then going back and really trying to figure out exactly why it wasn't working. I pulled out a Scratch card, talked with my colleague who was next to me, and finally we got the swimmer to make it over to the fish, and it was awesome. And that was like my first success that I had with Scratch, and I feel like once you have a success with Scratch, it's like an addiction. You have to keep going back and be like, okay, now what can I make the swimmer do? What can I make the fish do next? So it really is just like, much like when working with the students, it's having those little successes and then being open to thinking about what you can do next, and just having an idea of what the resources are available to support you when you want to keep looking and keep trying. So my successes often happen with teachers who are new, often are explaining what Scratch is, and then having a moment to sit down with them and have them click and play around with it, and doing something goofy like putting their face in there, or saying, okay, well, you're teaching the subject matter next week. Look, this is how we could do something like that with Scratch. So finding something they can connect to and sitting down with them one-on-one and showing them. And I usually pull out a bag of resources that I've collected over the years. So I have a lot of one-pagers that I printed out from the original curriculum guide. I have a set of Scratch cards that I also printed out. I always point them to the Scratch Ed website. So the Scratch Ed team, kudos to you guys, has put together a lot of resources already that are specifically for teachers. So I've definitely utilized those when working with teachers who are new to Scratch. I also always forget about it, but is a fantastic resource as well, is the help menu. So you can right-click on any block when you're in Scratch, and it will bring up a little help menu and explain exactly what that block does. And that's been really helpful to let teachers know that, hey, if you get stuck, you can just right-click on it and go to help, and it will walk you through what you can do with that block. So those are some of the things that I've done to help teachers get started. But working in public schools and understanding that there are only so many hours in the day, most of my success has been with finding something that's directly related to the curriculum, and Scratch is a great way to reinvigorate and the teaching and the learning and make it more exciting, and all those things, 21st century learning and hands-on, and Scratch has been a really awesome tool to use in the classroom for that. Did I answer all? Is there anything else? I think that was a lot of it.
So maybe you could tell us like a concrete story of practice. Like, what is something that you've seen in your own practice, or maybe in supporting another teacher's practice, like something exciting that you've seen a young learner be able to do with Scratch that maybe surprised you?
Okay, so something that so I did a lot of work last year with a science teacher, which was fantastic because we were able to do 3 different Scratch projects throughout the year. So we were able to scaffold off of previous experiences that the students had and add a little bit more and add a little bit more with each project. So the last project that we did was at the end of the year, and we left it very open-ended. Kind of had like a mini maker studio in the science classroom where the students could do a project about any science topic that they learned throughout the year and then present it to the class. So one student did they made a clay model of the Earth with all the different layers in it, and then they took a picture of it and put it into Scratch and also hooked it up to a Makey so that when you touched a different layer of the Earth, it brought up a different bubble on the layer in Scratch and told you a little bit about that. So it was a really interactive experience where you touched the layer and then it told you about it in Scratch. And that was not something that I don't think I would have thought of, and it was just, and she was so persistent with it, and at first the connectivity with the Makey wasn't working correctly, so she had to adjust the layers of the Play-Doh and the clay to make sure that she could make the right connections so that it would trigger the right things in Scratch. And it was exciting to watch her do that. And then another student with the same open-ended type of project was really into drumming and another Makey connection, but he made it so that when he was drumming on his drum kit, it would make an earthquake happen in Scratch. And he asked to actually skip other classes, maybe not something I would recommend, but he asked to skip other classes so that he could stay and work on his Scratch project. And it was so awesome to sit and watch him just really want to figure it out and really be able to accurately demonstrate what happens during an earthquake with a skill that the drumming, which he was, he's really into and really proud of, and putting those two together in a science class with Scratch and Makey was another inspiring thing to watch.
Yeah, those are great concrete examples. Thank you so much for sharing them. And it highlights an issue for me. It's something I hear a lot from educators who want to get started. There's this fear, like, I need to know everything to get started. And I think your comments about just like getting into it, playing with it, like have a bunch of resources at your disposal. You don't need to know everything at once, and this was raised in your earlier comments, like you don't need to know everything. You couldn't know everything even if you wanted to. Yeah, even if you tried, like the best of intentions. And I was looking in the chat roll, and I was really inspired by two comments in terms of their connections to this, like tension between, well, how much structure should you provide, how much freedom should you provide. So Sandy wrote, for me, I find that when I first introduce it, I must give the students just one whole class to play and explore. And Maureen further down talked about, my third graders a couple years ago did animations, hardly any front loading, and very successful. So I was wondering if we could actually like go around, and also in the chat roll, I encourage you to share like how you negotiate that balance between like how much do you have to give the kids, how do you think about that? And I think of kids very broadly. I teach graduate students, and I sometimes call them kids sort of unintentionally. But like, how do you support the learners, and how much support and structure do you have to give? So maybe we'll start with Christan. How do you think about, even thinking about your experiences when you got started with Scratch, like how much structure did you need, and how do you think about that relationship, and how did that come through in the guide?
Sure. So when I got started, I actually was introduced to Scratch last year, so I was very new to it. I had no idea what was going on. I call it the gray screen of death. For me, it was terrifying. Like, there was a Scratch cat and blocks, and I had no idea what was going on. But at the same time, I am forever a tinkerer at heart, and I love just diving into something, figuring out what's happening, and really just playing around with different things to try and make stuff happen. I made the most ridiculous project that I'm still very much in love with, but it took me probably 2 days longer than it should have. It probably should have taken me about 2 hours, but that was some of it. It's still one of my favorite things I've ever done. But in terms of how this influenced the guide, what I found is that I think I'm really attracted to the informal learning style of doing things versus the formalized traditional schooling. And at first that was really hard for me to kind of rein in. I was kind of like on the extreme of informal, and someone had to point it out to me, like, no, like there are things that have to happen in an actual schooling environment. But the whole choose your own adventure spirit of the guide, I think, is really what comes out in this. Because I was able to dive in and do what it was that I was most inspired by or intrigued by when exploring Scratch, I think that's what I really wanted to express while we were kind of working on the design of this.
Yeah, and I can add to that. I think for me, well, I guess talking from personal experience, when I first started with Scratch, or I'm the type of learner where I like to have an example first, or something that I can sort of work my way through, and then maybe have some open-ended time to like tinker around and try things out. So I actually really found myself finding useful a step-by-step tutorial that Scratch has. If you go to the Scratch website, scratch.mit.edu, and you click on the very top, there's a button that just says Create. It'll take you into the Scratch editor, and it'll open up in the tips window a very simple step-by-step tutorial that you can follow. And that, for me, I think was something that I think I would have really found useful when I was starting with Scratch. So just having sort of like as a very first introductory experience, something that sort of walked me through just sort of the mechanics of how to use Scratch itself, because like it's just like Christan, it can be really intimidating to when you open up Scratch, you see all these blocks and different buttons, and then there's this cat just sort of sitting there looking at you, and you're like, now what, you know? So, and I think that can be really intimidating for a lot of kids. So that was something that we also included in the guide as different entry points. So what are different ways to get started? Some people might sort of gravitate more to more of a tutorial style introductory experience, whereas others might like to do something a bit more exploratory. So we tried to offer different versions of ways that people could be introduced to Scratch for the first time. And then speaking a little bit on top of that, as I mentioned, you know, after that, having that type of introductory experience, I think what for me was important when I first started working with Scratch was to find something that I found was a project that I found personally meaningful, and that was sort of similar to Kristen's experience as well, and also something that I think we tried to include in the guide. So having those open-ended projects where students would be able to try to connect to it in a more personalized way, maybe bring in their own project or their own assets, you know, pick a song that might maybe inspired them for the music video activity, or the About Me interactive collage where they could maybe bring in some photos or something that they might feel a bit more personally connected with. I think that's another way to really get people to try out new things with Scratch and just new things with computation in general. So that would be sort of my advice, and just, I guess, talking from my own personal experience. Ingrid, maybe you want.
I think it was Sandy in the chat who said to give time to play, and I definitely agree. And I think it's a hard thing during the school day to say that, okay, we're going to give up a period, especially the way I do use Scratch and try to do computer science, which is integrated with other subject matters. To say I think we should give up a period for the kids to just play and the students to just play sometimes can be a hard bargaining point, but after we do it, we all kind of look around the room and we're like, yeah, we're glad we did that, because it gives the students a chance to figure out the interface on their own, and to maybe find a couple of favorite blocks. And for the students who already know Scratch, maybe there are a couple things that they want to try out, and then since they're in a classroom with their peers, then other students who maybe don't know as much will run over and be like, how did you do that? I want to learn how to do that. So even just giving a period to play with the end project in mind, saying, hey, see if you can figure out how to make this happen, or see if you can, get this type of sprite on the screen and make it interact with another sprite. Just gives them a chance to do it on their own. And then what I've typically done is jumped in a class after that with giving little mini tutorials for some blocks that may help them be successful in creating an end product. Some students like to stick to that. I've kind of made my own little scratch cards based on whatever the project is that we're doing, and they find that really handy. And then some kids take a look at it and they're like, oh, I can do this better, and they'll go off on their own. So but I think the period to play it pays off in the long run, and everybody has fun. And then if the teacher doesn't know a lot about Scratch either, then they get to go around and have a learning experience with the students and show them that they're learning, and it really helps build a sense of community around Scratch.
So I just wanted to highlight some of the connections that are being made in the chat roll. I'm like listening with one ear and then like watching the chat roll. So there was an earlier 7:39 p.m. Thank goodness for timestamps. This is from Maureen. I am not a programmer at all. Debugging is really hard for me and lets me model the process for the kids. And I just think that's so powerful and beautiful. And sometimes with educators are like, oh, I have no CS background, I don't know anything about programming. I actually sort of like secretly confide that I think that can be an asset. So I think if you have a computer, and I say this as someone who has a computer science background, sometimes you look at a problem, you immediately know how to solve the problem. And it's just incredibly powerful for young learners to see the teacher as a learner as well. It becomes much more collaborative. It becomes a community effort. So I love that comment from Maureen, because just modeling is such a part of the design process, and it really is a process. Like, there's something beautiful about the product and the pride of creating your Pretty Little Liars project, or whatever. There's like that satisfaction and triumph, but it's all about the process. Another thread that started in the chat roll, and this was building on Michelle's comments. I saw Maureen respond to this about like taking someone's project and follow it. And I know the first names of a bunch of these people, but not of MMS Fraser 210. So I'm sorry for that like aliasing. But that's why I love remixing. I can see what others have done that works and make it my own. And I love that idea. So I was wondering if one of the three of you would be willing/happy to talk about remixing on the Scratch platform. Who can I tag in for what is remixing and how does it work? Everyone's pointing at Ingrid. Okay, Ingrid's being tagged in by the group.
So the idea of remixing is that you take somebody else's project or idea that they have, and then you put your own twist on it. So it could be something simple as changing a sprite or changing a code to make it a little bit better, or taking one idea and then completely remixing it and going in a different direction, but you started with somebody else's idea. So it really is about sharing both the artwork that's in Scratch and the sprites, and sharing the scripts that people made. So remixing could be on different levels within Scratch depending on what you want to use and what you want to do. So I like it on the Scratch website. They have a remix tree, so you can actually see what the original project was if somebody remixed it, so you can track it back and say, oh wow, this one project's been remixed 842 times, which is a possibility on the Scratch website. Some of the more popular ones have been remixed, thousands of times. So, yeah, the idea of remixing is great, because you can also use it to have a starter project and say, okay, everybody put your own twist, your own spin on it, and it's a great place to start and a great place to see how everybody is creative in their own ways. So.
Anything to add about remix?
Yeah, one thing I really like about the remixing on Scratch is that you give contribution to those that you're pulling from. And I think that's a really beautiful piece about Scratch, that the idea of remix in general, it seems to have like this kind of tainted view on it. People, assume that you're stealing someone's work, or you're not being your own creative self, you're not doing your own work. But in Scratch, that's not the case at all. You're building on top of someone else's. You're adding your own twist to it. So, you're remixing, but really it's your project that you're working on. But you're at the same time, you're building this community with that person that helped you get started. And then from there, maybe someone can get started based off of your project. I find that piece really beautiful, and I love it a lot. So I thought it was worth mentioning.
Totally agreed. And also from chat roll, this J. Robson FHS's icon, it looks like a baby owl and it's painfully cute. This person notes that kids get a real buzz out of remixing and showing their friends in class, which is really awesome. So I think it speaks again to that like sense of authentic audience. I can see in the background that Michelle is queuing up the visuals for a remix tree. Do we have a remix tree that we can swap to live?
Yeah, so I just wanted to share what a remix tree looks like. So I just looked up, if you go to the front page of Scratch and you scroll down, there are different example projects that are offered on the front page. And one of the lines in the thumbnails that they offer is what the community is remixing, which I think is really fun. And this happened to be one of the projects that was in there. Actually, this project is all about, is the title of this project, the base project happened to be Growing Your Own Tree. So I picked that, and it's been remixed over 176 different times, so you can see some of the branches and some of the different ways which signify when the project has been sort of like branched off and remixed in a different way. So you can, just to give you a taste of what people are doing with Scratch and how projects are being taken in different directions. And I think that the remix tree is a really beautiful sort of metaphor and visual for thinking about remixing and sharing ideas.
Okay, so we only have 10 minutes left. So I thought maybe, an hour seems like so much time, and then suddenly it's almost over. So I thought we could actually sort of like come first full circle back to this question, like, how do I get started? Maybe expanding now that we know how to get started, how do we continue? So like doing a recap of resources. So we've talked about the Scratch Ed Online community. We've sort of peeked into the guide, but there's so much in it. Like, as you could tell, even for this was painful, I'm sure, for Michelle and Christan to try and summarize it, because I'm like, okay, we only have this much time. And so it's like, just download it. It's a free download. We'll post the link in the chat roll. I encourage you to download it, look at the PDF. We also have the editable version of it, which is a PowerPoint format, which is maybe a little unexpected, but we really encourage you to remix it, reimagine it, pull it apart, customize it for your setting. Other resources we wanted to highlight, one that was suggested by Maureen. I will turn it over to Ingrid to talk about the educator meetups.
So for 4 years, yes, 4 years, the Scratch Ed team hosted meetups for local educators in the New England. It started Cambridge and Massachusetts and New England and then beyond. Basically, educators interested in learning more about Scratch. And I was excited with myself and Janet and Rosemary, Janet D. and Rosemary Slattery. We've kind of taken over the Cambridge area meetups this year, and we're hosting them at Cambridge Public Schools, the Kennedy Longfellow School. They have a makerspace there through the Leslie Partnership, and so we're lucky to be able to host them once a month over there. So I posted the link as well. It's through an Eventbrite page and 10 to 1, and it's a really great learning community. I know that's where I started to feel more comfortable with Scratch, and there's also Scratch educator meetups in New York City. So those are the East Coast ones that I know of. There may be others in other areas that other members of the Scratch team can talk to you about. But if you're anywhere in the New England area and would like to come to one of our meetups, you're more than welcome to come. We've been playing with Little Bits and Makey-Makeys and Lego We Do kits, all of the extensions, and spending more time just getting used to Scratch and intros to Scratch, all levels of people, just educators interested in talking about Scratch.
So in her remarks, Ingrid gave a shout out to what's happening in New York City. I'm going to transition to Michelle, actually, who will be heading down to the New York meetup and hosting a workshop there. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what's happening in New York City this weekend, and also the meetup work you're doing, because maybe we can recruit some people to help us with that project.
Sure. Yeah, so actually, as Ingrid mentioned, they are doing meetups in the Cambridge area, and a group called CSNY that came out of NYU has been hosting meetups in the New York area for people who might be in that geographical location. So they're actually hosting their October meetup this Sunday, if you're interested, with special guest. Mitch Resnick is actually going to be there visiting this weekend. So if you're in the New York area and you'd like to join, I'll post a link to it in the chat for people who might be interested in joining. And if you're also around on this Saturday, I'm going to be there hosting sort of a getting started workshop about the guide and creative computing with Scratch. So if you're interested, I also encourage you to get started with that, and feel free to join that. So I'll also post a link to the workshop. It's also free. Happening this Saturday, and then the New York meetup on Sunday.
So there's a question, any in Connecticut? Where are other places we know that the Meetups plus the vision for the Meetup Kit, all of the above?
Yes, the vision. Yeah, so I don't really know about other places. I mean, we have gotten some emails about people who've sort of self-organized meetups in their local town, and that's actually something that we're looking forward to trying to support more. So actually, currently this fall, we're working on developing a Meetup Kit of sorts, I guess, or a Meetup guide to help organizers who might be interested in hosting a meetup near them for local educators who are working with Scratch. And so I would really encourage you to look forward to that coming out later this fall. Maybe we're hoping for by December to have it online. So I would definitely keep an eye out on Scratchhead for that. And also, if you're interested in hosting meetups near you, please reach out to us because we might be interested in partnering with some people who might be interested in getting started with being able to sort of scale the work that we've been doing and spread the meetups to beyond just Cambridge and New York.
Okay, so I thought we could end with sort of getting words of wisdom or comforting thoughts from each person in the session of sort of like, you know, what is your 30-second haiku-esque yeah, what is your tweet advice for people who are just getting started or who are keeping on? So why don't we go left to right on the screen? So we'll kick it off with Christan. Is it okay if we dive in with you?
Sure. So the kind of key takeaway here. I think, well, for me, the big part is the choose your own adventure. There's a lot going on in this guide, and that can be intimidating in and of itself. But we specifically did that to make it a choose your own adventure. So you don't have to do every activity. Your students don't need to do every activity. Pick and choose the ones that are meaningful to you or are meaningful to your students. Allow them to pick and choose the ones that are meaningful to them. And really just have fun with it. There's a lot going on. Pick and choose what you need to do, and I think that I think it'll be good.
So I think my advice is, I know personally I have a hard time learning new languages, and I took Latin in high school for that reason because I didn't have to speak it. But I learned a lot while I was doing it. But and then I ended up taking another language in college, and it just Scratch is another language, and computer science is another language, and with that it takes time. But I have to say it has been the most enjoyable to learn how to speak Scratch and speak computer science languages and more programming languages, because it is so visually based and it is so interactive and it is so meaningful. So it has been one of the easiest languages for me to learn, and I'm very glad that I took the time to start playing around with it. So I think if you think of it like, just acknowledge that yes, you're learning how to use Scratch, and it in itself is another language, and just be patient and persistent with it like you would with any other new thing that you're learning. It definitely pays off.
Yeah, I would actually segueing with that. My major in college was actually French literature, so I studied languages as well, and I did not study computer science. So I love telling people that Scratch was my very first programming language. And so my advice to people would be sort of, I guess, going off of what I said earlier, that, don't be afraid, don't worry that you have to know everything, because, well, you kind of can't, and that it's really all about exploring and tinkering and trying out new things. And so I think setting that tone and trying to establish that type of culture within your classroom could be really a powerful thing for students to also learn that, oh, it's okay to not know everything, and it's okay to try different things out. And I guess my second piece of advice is that if you do have questions, you're not quite sure what to do, reach out for resources. So I would really encourage to download the guide, to look for tutorials or examples online on Scratchhead and on the Scratch community itself. There are over 6 million projects, so there's definitely not no shortage of ideas. Thank you so much, Ingrid. No shortage of ideas or ways to get started. And with that, I'll send it back to Karen.
Okay, so with a minute to go, I just want to thank everyone for being here, taking time. It is not 5 p.m. Pacific time. It is verging on 8 p.m. our time. And I know we've got friends in Europe who are joining us, so I know you're up well past your bedtime. So if you're interested in learning more about connected learning, make sure to check out the Connected Learning Alliance site at, we'll put this in the chat roll as well, coming to say these URLs, so clalliance.org. There are tremendous testimonials from practitioners and informative multimedia pieces, and if you would like to sort of keep abreast of future opportunities from Educator Innovator and the partners like you've heard about today, sign up for the monthly newsletter. I'm a huge fan of newsletters, and so sign up for the Educator Innovator newsletter. That's at educatorinnovator.org, and follow Educator Innovator on Twitter at @innovates_ed. Also, you can find all of us on Twitter as well. Michelle is Scratch Ed Team, if you've ever wondered who that is. But thank you so much for joining us. It was so wonderful to see many familiar faces and some new friends. We hope to see you in person, online, and at our next event. Okay, thank you so much.